Inside the Castle, the podcast that goes behind castle doors to have real conversations with real people about solving the nation's toughest challenges. I'm one of your hosts, Angie Freiermuth.
And I'm Aaron Snyder. Today we have two guests joining us to discuss trust inside and outside the organization. With us today are Katie Williams, who's a RIT deputy at headquarters, and Eileen Takata, who's a watershed planner and public involvement specialist for the LA district. Thank you both for joining us here today.
Awesome to be here.
Thanks for having me.
So trust is a critical component of being a successful organization. Leadership has recognized trust as a strategic area of improvement for the organization. Katie, speaking of leaders and trust, what insights can you provide into trust within headquarters?
As you stated, trust is a very critical element. And within headquarters, I would say it's something that we need to continue working on and improving. It is something that is very dependent on having relationships. And quite frankly, we've had quite the turnover in leadership in the past year or two. And I certainly feel as though building those relationships with our leaders and, vice versa, because it is a mutual process, it is critical to be able to ensure we are having trust at our level, and that is feeding down to all the other levels.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And so when we talk about trust at all levels and developing those relationships, Eileen, you work at a district, and so as a planner and a person that does public involvement, how is trust being worked down through your chain of command and being built within your organization?
Well, that's a good question because if you're a stakeholder looking at the Corps and you're asked, hey, do I trust the Army Corps of Engineers? And if I were a stakeholder, when I was a stakeholder, as a matter of fact, when I was with a local county government and a non-federal sponsor, I would say, that's hard. I trust the individuals I work with because they keep lines of communication open. I trust them to tell me when things are not going well or what I need to do next. And then I can say, well, I trust the Corps because there are people there who I trust. And that doesn't mean I trust everybody or necessarily the system or the organization. And this is truly, that is how I felt. So it boils down to the individuals and the relationships between individuals externally and internally. And leadership would recognize that within the Corps. So now we're being asked as public involvement specialists to help build that collaborative capacity within the Corps. And hey, let's get our folks trained up at the districts on how to build that trust, and leadership supports those efforts, which is great.
Yeah. So, Katie, what specifically should leadership be doing to help facilitate that communication and collaborations between employees, at headquarters, but throughout the organization? And, if there are challenges, and it sounds like there are, what specifically should they be doing to help build that bench and to improve trust and, really get to a place or a safe place for everybody to work?
So I certainly feel that trust requires certain things. One of that is having open communication, that mutual communication. Let's be honest, we work in a military organization. We have a chain of command, and quite often we report up and we continue reporting up, and it often feels as though there's not a lot of reporting down. So I guess that would be one thing I would start with, is having more open communication that goes down as well, not just reporting up. Also to really understand and build that trust, you have to know what the vision is. And that just gets back to being able to communicate that from the from our senior leaders down to everyone in the workforce, whether that's right at headquarters or the district or division level. So really, we can be transparent. That seems like a cliche to say, but it definitely is an important aspect as well as communication and being able to build that trust. So just overall, those are a few of the key tenets I would say is having that mutual communication that involves a clear vision and being transparent so that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Being transparent and open, both internally and externally, is a key component of trust. And so, Eileen, when you're doing public involvement and you're working with the external audiences, how important is it for the Corps of Engineers to really listen to our partners and make sure that we're taking time to just listen and build that trust instead of always being quick to have the solution and thinking that we have the right answers all the time?
Well, that is such a great question, Angie. That practice of active listening, right, when we teach public involvement and teaming, that's one of the key modules. And there are many ways to do that. If we don't listen carefully and keep just spouting our guidance and our schedule limitations and all this and that, we're not going to solve any problems, right? So because we know that we're here because of the stakeholders and the non-title sponsors. We are not in an area working on a problem for our health. We were asked to solve a problem locally. So we've got to listen, not just to the sponsor, obviously, but to all those key stakeholders who could actually help create a better, lasting, sustainable solution. So it's in our best interest and everyone's best interest to listen and really provide that space and those opportunities. And so as public involvement specialists, we encourage, say, a feasibility planning process to go well beyond the required NEPA, sort of scoping meeting at the beginning and, hey, we're done with the draft report, so let's have a public meeting announcing it. I mean, that's not going to get you all the potential great alternatives that, we're limited in seeing what those alternatives are and what the possibilities are. But the people on the ground, they're the experts. They know the area. They know the problems. We want to hear from them, and we need to create those spaces for that conversation to happen. And if I could just echo what Katie said a little bit ago about that open communication is so critical. It applies to external stakeholder relationships too, and public involvement specialists can help sort of strategize, come up with a good plan, a communication and public involvement plan. But part of that is that shared vision as well. If we don't agree on the problem and we don't agree, then how can we agree on the solution? And transparency. And I can talk about that later, but I'll let you get back to another question.
Thanks, Eileen. That's great. And Katie, so Eileen reflected a little bit on the local partners and working with them, but, more from the top, you worked on Capitol Hill for a while, and what challenges did you see with trust and the organization really from that upper perspective?
Thanks, Aaron. I did do a detail on the Hill for nearly a year on the appropriations subcommittee, and it was certainly an eye-opening experience and to see how our agency is viewed from there on Capitol Hill. And I'll say honestly that overall our agency is well respected, but nonetheless, trust, there are some issues with trust. I would say that, one example working, and I'm saying this coming from working on the appropriations subcommittee, I'm not going to say anything about the authorizers or how they view things. When we're asking for information about capabilities and project costs and what have you, that's kind of a repetitive process because the Hill doesn't always work on a schedule that they should be working on. So we ask for project costs 1 month, and then we need an updated or at least a verification, another month. That's just kind of a very simplified example, right? And where trust is questioned is when those costs or capabilities start changing and there's no explanation for why. And I think that's where we need to be better about knowing our audience. And this is for relationship on the Hill, but also with our external stakeholders, our non-federal sponsors, is you have to know where they're coming from because they don't understand all the inner workings of the agency, nor should they have to understand all of that. But we have to be able to clearly explain why something is why it is. And again, they don't need to know all of our inner processes, but you have to be able to provide them with enough information for them to understand. So I do think that that is something that we just have to continue working on and be willing to have those communications to explain, because it's not always an easy discussion to have that, hey, we messed up or we provided a wrong number recently. But you know what? At the end of the day, have to understand that we're all humans and we make mistakes, but we also have to own that and just be able to explain why that mistake was made or what we're doing to rectify it, and be able to explain why some of those numbers change, because there's valid reasons and they just need to understand why that is.
Yeah, really good points, Katie. I totally agree that, we always need to own up to our mistakes. That's exactly how you build trust, right? If something happens, make sure that they understand that we understand that it was, on our part, and we're going to try to fix it, right? And so just thinking about that, and, the Corps is always under the limelight for everything that we pretty much do. So how do we continue to build this socially visible presence and building trust in a virtual environment? Right now we're living in, a more virtual environment than we ever thought we would. And so a lot of people realize that a lot of relationship building has to occur face-to-face. And I agree. Good face-to-face communication, it always builds relationships. But how can we continue to build relationships and remain socially visible to our public constituents in the time that we're living in?
Right. That is the question, right? How to build and maintain trust in a virtual environment, because that's our normal right now. And it's been one big, long experiment for the last several months trying to reconcile, how do we do that? So, I have found during quarantine, this period of time has taught me a couple things, that it's hard to build trust and really build relationships that don't exist. But I also found it's not hard to maintain ones that do exist, because I use the, hey, what's going on, how you doing, check-in as an excuse to call someone. So those, the phone has been a fantastic way to keep up with those relationships, especially internally and externally. But if the trust and relationship isn't already developed, it's frankly harder, but there are ways you can still achieve those things, because trust-based good relationships based on trust are based on open lines of communication, like we talked about, which is very doable in a virtual environment. It's also based on that transparency. Katie's been talking about these things, and I'm just wanting to echo them. That fine line between explaining what went wrong and not giving them everything, because we're not allowed to talk about everything. It's a tension, but the art of explaining things is important. But in the end, we need to be able to be transparent. We can get to that shared vision together virtually. We can also do the follow-ups and things that, continue to maintain trust. And so all of those things are doable. You're just not going to get the same level as face-to-face, but I do believe we can't use this as an excuse, but use it as an opportunity.
And to add on to what Eileen was talking about, someone said something to me actually just yesterday about having been so successful the past 6 or 7 months in this max telework environment because we already had built-in relationships. And that really struck a chord with me because I think that was a very valid statement. As a supervisor, I've now onboarded several brand new employees to my team in this environment. That's certainly a challenge. It's not something I ever expected to do. So that is much harder to build those relationships in this type of environment. So whether you're thinking as a supervisor with employees or with new potential sponsors or what have you, it's about, I think what Eileen was talking about, picking up the phone and just having a conversation. You don't always have to dive into the deep end about work-related stuff. It's about trying to build those relationships and getting to know folks. And I think that can help the relationship building and the trust go a long way if you're able to have some of that dialogue.
In building relationships, it's about having those shared experiences, right? And the best shared experiences are the ones face-to-face. We put on a virtual conference called Watershed U in California, and to this day, I still have conversations with some of the stakeholders who participated in that because it was so fun and it was refreshing, and even though it was all virtual, it was a shared experience, and that has continued to keep doors open for the interactions to take place one-on-one or in smaller groups, and it's tiered off additional discussions. And that's what we want, is the network effect, the ripple effect of shared experiences, whether they're a phone call, a web meeting, or something else. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that that's really important. You want to build those in, whatever that looks like virtually.
Yeah. So, you both talked about opportunities and this virtual environment. And, I think it's really an opportunity for us. And I heard somebody say this, that this is really the great reset for the organization. We're able to reset the norms now based on this COVID experience. And obviously the entire virtual work from home thing isn't going to be the norm, but, increasing the balance between that. And when you work with people virtually, both as staff and supervisors, how are we able to maintain accountability? Because it's really important with trust that you have accountability. And as employees, we have to be accountable. But as leaders, we have to be accountable. So, maybe Eileen first and then Katie second. What does accountability mean to you? And how do you ensure that moves forward in this virtual environment?
I absolutely love that concept and practice of accountability. 2 quick examples. Internally, ever since COVID hit, we've had a daily check-in call at lunchtime with our plan formulation group, daily. And if you couldn't make it, you couldn't make it. But and they last maybe 15 minutes. I love that. On the external side, just last week, I became the interim ambassador for the LA River Watershed Urban Water Shuttle Partnership. Within 2 days, I got 3 phone calls from old stakeholder friends who want information or want to pass information on to the Corps. So they see me as a gate. And I told them, hey, if you don't hear from me, call me back in a week or 2 weeks or email me. Keep bugging me because I may not have the answer. I may not be able to get back to you right away, or I may have forgotten if I, get really busy. So I've always left that door open to folks to go ahead and hold me accountable if they didn't mind doing that. So It was funny how the calls just started flooding in. But hey, that's what these relationships that have been around for decades are good for, is I can get them information, or try anyway, and give them the answer that they're looking for.
To build on that, I almost see trust as the whole glass half full versus glass half empty approach, and that some people will trust from the get-go, and then as soon as you start making mistakes, then you're chipping away at their trust. Whereas other people, you have to build the trust up. So I do think that accountability comes into play here. And going back to being a supervisor, you have to know your people and understand kind of what makes them tick, what motivates them. And I think that is very true for our leaders in terms of them being supervisors as well over us, but also just leaders in general for the agency. They have to set reasonable expectations that are then actually shared with the workforce. So our employees know how they fit into that. And again, to keep beating the drum, it goes back to mutual open communication. Because accountability is critical, that we should be holding our employees accountable for their responsibilities and, even their mistakes at times. We all have to learn from our mistakes. I do think that is a critical element, and often it's not something easy, and it's not something that we always do. Sometimes we just go to the extreme and not really holding ourselves accountable.
Really good points. Thanks to both of you for that. We're approaching the end of our time together, and so I want to toss it back out to both of you for any closing thoughts on trust. Are there key points that you want to make, or key lessons that you want to share with the audience? So I will first start with Katie, and then we'll end it with Eileen.
Thanks. And I appreciate this opportunity to participate. Trust, for me, is a critical component of being a leader, but also being just a regular employee of the agency. I have to trust my leaders just as they have to trust me. It is really an essential element, and it doesn't always feel like it's there at the moment. So I really do feel like that relationship building is going to be a key aspect. And, we've already discussed it. There are challenges in this current environment, but those challenges can be overcome, and it doesn't take that much, a few minutes here or there just to check in with folks and ensure that messages are being relayed. Sometimes that's all it really does take. Trust in general, we can always continue improving and just working to be a better agency overall.
I enjoy hearing Katie's perspective from being in DC, and here out in the field, the relationships are everything. And I wanted to add sort of the concept of what if trust was broken, I won't belabor it, but, we have a teaching slide, and there's sort of 3 things you have to do to try and repair that trust. And the first one is with words and communicating an apology, explanations, and commitment to, reducing those reasons for breaking the trust. But you need to have some actions. Can you modify, an agreement, put an MOU? Is there financial compensation? Who knows? But do something to show that you really mean it. And the apology, by the way, is really hard for us. And finally, the structural changes, like what systematically is in place that can be altered to reduce or minimize those instances of trust breaking again. So those are kind of the 3 sort of road to recovery. And, the analogy of taking a clean piece of paper comes to mind, where you crumple up that piece of paper, and once you try and smooth it flat, it will never be as good as it was fresh out of the copier, right? You can't feed it through the copier. It's just wrinkly. And so that's, kind of what happens when you break the trust. It's hard to get back to the level it was, and all the follow-up in the world may or may not bring it back. But as long as people know, individuals know, that they can come talk to you, to me, to anyone at the Corps, that avenue to repairing that trust will always be there. The potential is always there. So that's all I wanted to add, and I just thank you for this opportunity to talk about stakeholders and trust.
Great. Well, I think it's been wonderful having you two with us here today. And I think, really to emphasize it is just, trust is critically important to the organization. And as Katie said, trust just takes a minute. So, we want all of our employees out there just to take that time, take those few minutes a day to reach out to their employees and their coworkers, just to have those conversations and support them and make sure that we're there for each other. But with that, I want to thank you, Katie and Eileen, for joining us today for this edition of Inside the Castle. We appreciate you and your thoughts on trust. To our listeners, we want to hear from you, what topics are important to you, and people you're interested in hearing from. Until next time, be safe, be innovative, and be revolutionary.
Thanks for joining us for this Inside the Castle podcast. To provide your feedback, email us at cw.infrastructure.team@usace.army.mil. Stay tuned for additional Inside the Castle podcasts as we explore life inside the Corps and revolutionize civil works together.